Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia and today's Westpac address. My name is Sabra Lane. I am the club's president. I'm also the presenter of the ABC radio program AM. Today's guest is Angus Taylor. He's making his first address to the National Press Club. He's the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reductions. He's presenting the inaugural Low Emissions Technology Statement here today. This event is being held under COVID-19 restrictions. If you're following online, you'll find us on Twitter. Our user handle is @PressClubAUST. Everybody, please join me in welcoming Angus Taylor.
Well, thank you, Sabra, and it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak here. As you said, my first time speaking to the Press Club, not my first time speaking in the Press Club, but it is a great pleasure and thank you very much for having me. Today is an important day in the advancement of our emissions reduction agenda that will strengthen the economy and create jobs. It's the culmination of a process that kicked off shortly after we won the last election, leading to the development of the Technology Investment Roadmap and the first low emissions technology statement. Now, we're making good progress in tackling these issues, but across the globe, bringing down emissions whilst maintaining strong economies is a major challenge. Bringing down emissions while strengthening economies isn't the first challenge that humans have had to overcome. We've dealt with many of those over the course of our evolution, be they economic, engineering, or environmental challenges. We've overcome these time and time again. We've done this by investing in technology development, by using humans' innate ingenuity and enterprise to solve hard problems. It's actually a remarkably consistent part of history. We see a challenge and we overcome it with a better way, a faster way, and a more cost-effective way. Thomas Newcomen's steam engine opened up previously inaccessible coal mines across Europe, powering the Industrial Revolution and opening up a pathway to unprecedented and unimaginable prosperity. The Haber-Bosch process to produce nitrogen fertiliser in large volumes and at low costs led to the agricultural revolution and a quadrupling of crop yields. Without this and other advances, feeding the world would require double the land we currently use for agriculture. Closer to home, the Snowy Mountains scheme is another example of local technology innovation, which we're building on with Snowy 2. Now, we're all living through a year like no other. We must follow the lessons of history and develop and then adopt new technologies to solve our hardest problems. With COVID, it's the race for better prevention, treatment, and ultimately a vaccine. This is the only way to avoid economy-sapping shutdowns. In emissions reduction, it's the race for cost-effective, low and negative emissions technologies that will strengthen our economy, not weaken it. And that's why the government has undertaken to develop, fund, and drive a low emissions technology roadmap. History's also shown us that you don't tax your way out of a challenge like this. Let's be clear. There are only two ways to reduce emissions. You either suppress emissions-intensive economic activities through some version of taxation, or you improve those activities. There is no third way. Australia can't and shouldn't damage its economy to reduce emissions. We shouldn't forget that when developing countries have been asked to sacrifice prosperity for the environment, they've typically prioritised prosperity. That was the lesson of Copenhagen. We can't ask them to make the trade-off. We should also remember that global emissions reduction is the ultimate goal here, with the Paris Agreement seeking to achieve net zero in the second half of this century for the globe, or preferably sooner. Now, the only pathway to global emissions reduction while strengthening prosperity is through developing low emissions technologies at lower cost than higher emitting alternatives. To that end, we have four core principles behind our work. The first, a relentless focus on outcomes. The second, the deployment of technology, not taxes. The third, respect for consumer choice. And fourth, a goal to maintain a balance of fuel and technology sources. We need more horses in the race, not less. In terms of outcomes, Australia has done remarkably well in emissions reduction in recent years. We're a world leader in renewable energy investment, deploying wind and solar at 10 times the global per capita average. Remarkably, the pandemic hasn't slowed this down. The Clean Energy Regulator forecasts that investment in new renewable energy generation in 2020 will match the 6.3 gigawatts or $9 billion of investment, the record set in 2019. As a result of this and other action by Australians, we've beaten our Kyoto targets by up to 430 million tonnes, which is almost a year's worth of emissions. Compare our track record with similar emissions-intensive, export-oriented countries, developed nations like Canada and New Zealand, and the results are stark. Pre-COVID, Australia's emissions were down 13% on 2005 levels, the baseline year for the Paris Agreement targets. Canada's emissions over that time frame haven't fallen, while New Zealand's have only fallen 1% versus our 13%, and New Zealand's are projected to increase sharply in future years on their own projections. But we've also learned from the last decade, particularly with respect to unintended consequences and the need to maintain balance in our energy system. The early retirement of Hazelwood in Victoria caused a major shock in our electricity market, a shock that we can't repeat. And why was it a shock? Because the analysis was flawed. And I still hear much of that analysis today. For decades, our energy system was getting two services for free. And other than hardcore engineers, we didn't think much about it. We received frequency control, so critical to grid stability, for free. We had an oversupply of big thermal generators, and it was easy to make sure that the grid was stable. And second, we received energy storage for free. So when we compared the cost of generation between wind and solar and traditional generators, we forgot about the services we were getting for free. Coal had built-in storage. It was a stockpile next to the generator. Whereas storage and backup are not automatically part of a solar and wind farm. We effectively compared a block of land with a house and land deal and assumed they were the same. Now that's just the reality of the modern grid. It's neither good nor bad. But there was a clear failure. We haven't had a dispatchable generator built in New South Wales for over 10 years. And that's why we've established the $1 billion Grid Reliability Fund alongside the Retailer Reliability Obligation to ensure that Australia's world-leading deployment of renewables is integrated and backed up. We saw the problem and we're stepping in to address it in a practical way. So why is this important for the tech roadmap? The roadmap is about managing the future without ignoring the lessons of the past. We were successful in meeting and beating our targets because we had lots of horses in the race. But there were challenges, and those included underestimating the pace of change and particularly the unintended consequences of those changes. And if we get this wrong, if we suppress the economy to achieve our emissions reduction goals, then we've gone down the wrong path. The timely development and application of technologies can lower prices for energy, achieve our goals and protect our way of life, if we learn the lessons from the past. Now, throughout history, we've seen some of the best technology advancements made through a combination of private and public sectors. The public sector has been making interventions and investments in research and development for as long as there has been a public sector. This isn't new. History tells us that we get the best results when the public sector supports R&D, particularly at the high-risk early stages, and then the private sector drives deployment, commercialisation and scale. The roadmap also recognises that our investments should drive towards our natural advantages here in Australia, such as our abundant natural resources. Put simply, we should pursue opportunities that play to Australia's strengths, recognising that we can play a global leadership role where we have real advantage. I've been greatly heartened by the engagement we've received in the development of this work. My reference panel received over 500 submissions. Alan, Drew, Shamara, Grant, Alison, Ben and Joe, some of whom are here today, some of whom I know couldn't be here because of restrictions, have met regularly on the development of this roadmap. Over 400 people and 150 businesses, researchers and peak bodies attended events during the roadmap's development. This engagement has been absolutely critical to the development. And this is why the government has decided to formalise our ongoing advisory council, chaired by Dr Alan Finkel. The Ministerial Reference Panel will be converted into an enduring institution, the Technology Investment Advisory Council, to advise on future low emissions technology statements, like the one today. Now, joining the council will be the chairs of ARENA, CFC and the Clean Energy Regulator. The council will be tasked with annually reviewing technologies in the roadmap and making recommendations on their place within the framework. Now, our framework has 4 technology categories, each with different opportunities and initiatives attached to them. They are priority low emissions technologies, emerging and enabling technologies, watching brief technologies, and mature technologies. Priority technologies are those expected to have transformational impacts here and globally that are not yet mature. These technologies have high abatement and economic potential in areas of comparative advantage for Australia. They're priorities where government investments can make a difference in reducing costs and improving technology readiness. Technologies where we as a government will not only prioritise our investments, but where we'll streamline regulation and legislation to encourage investment. Investors will have confidence that identified priority technologies are of long-term strategic importance to the government. Those identified in the first statement are clean hydrogen, electricity from storage and firming, for firming, low carbon steel and aluminium, carbon capture and storage, and soil carbon. This statement sets economic stretch goals for each of these technologies, stretch goals which are competitive with higher emitting alternatives. Now, we've already announced the first of these goals, hydrogen production under $2 per kilogram, H2 under 2. And today we announce 4 new stretch goals. Long duration energy storage dispatched at under $100 a megawatt hour, which would enable firmed wind and solar to be delivered at prices around or below today's average wholesale price. CO2 compression, transport and storage at under $20 a tonne. Low emission steel production at under $900 a tonne, and aluminium under $2,700 a tonne. And fourth, soil carbon measurement for less than $3 per hectare per year. We know what we're aiming for and we know why. Getting these technologies right will strengthen our economy and create jobs, but they will significantly reduce global emissions across sectors across the world that emit 45 billion tonnes annually. Australia alone will avoid 250 million tonnes of emissions through these technologies if we reach the stretch goals by 2040. Having these goals will enable us to measure our progress through the future. Over the last decade, there's been enormous focus on electricity, which makes up only 32% of our total emissions. These technologies we've outlined today will broaden the focus to include the other 68% of emissions outside of the grid, in industry, manufacturing, agriculture and transport. We'll be able to adjust our course based on the data we have. Are we seeing the improvement in the technology that we need? Is the private sector following the government's investment? If not, why not? Priority technologies and stretch goals will not be adjusted or cancelled lightly. Changes will be the result of rigorous impact evaluation, stakeholder consultation and advice from the Technology Investment Advisory Council. Now, while the priority technologies are important, they're not the only technologies that our agencies invest in. Emerging and enabling technologies will be included in the mandates of our technology investment agencies. We expect them to identify and invest in opportunities in these areas that meet their investment mandates. However, these technologies will not have the same detailed reporting and investment focus as the priorities. Over time, they may become priorities, or they may drop off altogether. That's the point of having as many horses in the race as possible and having a pathway for priorities to evolve. 10 years ago, there were many technologies that were promising and many that seemed far off. We can all think of examples. Some delivered, some didn't. Watching brief technologies like small modular reactors are also in the roadmap. They could play an important role over the long term. We don't expect our agencies to directly invest in these technologies, but the government may consider R&D support where appropriate. We'll closely watch the international development of those technologies. And finally, there are mature technologies. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk about coal and gas in the roadmap. And there's no doubt that existing proven technologies like coal, gas, solar and wind will all play an important role in Australia's energy future. The government will continue to invest in mature technologies where there's a clear market failure, like a shortage of dispatchable capacity. But this is a new technology investment roadmap, a roadmap that seeks to drive investment in emerging technologies. It recognises that widespread deployment is primarily driven by the private sector. Australia's competitive advantage has always been on cheap energy. Gas will be central to our ongoing recovery, while coal continues to play an enormously important role in our energy system. And I've already referred to our record investments in solar and wind. But solar, wind, gas, coal and hydro are all mature technologies. They're already cost competitive sources of energy and don't require significant public R&D investment. If there are major new breakthroughs emerging in these technologies, we'll consider them, but that's not the focus at this point. Now, the tech roadmap arms the government with 4 levers to enact change. First, investment and incentives. Following each annual roadmap, I'll direct my agencies to focus on investments in priority technologies. The roadmap will guide the deployment of the $18 billion that will be invested directly from the federal government, including through the CFC, ARENA, the Climate Solutions Fund and the Clean Energy Regulator. Our plan is to increase that to at least $50 billion through the private sector, state governments, research institutions and other publicly funded research agencies. That will drive around 130,000 jobs through to 2030. Importantly, these are jobs with a strong focus in the regions and in traditional industries such as agriculture, manufacturing and resources. Last week you saw our R&D investment framework in action with $1.9 billion of new funding, including guaranteed baseline funding for ARENA, the Technology Investment Fund that will support green steel, green aluminium and soil carbon, the Future Fuels Fund that supports EVs, hydrogen cells and biofuels in a technology-neutral approach to transport, our first hydrogen export hub, investment to scale carbon capture and storage, and investment in energy efficiency, technology and outcomes. Now, second, alongside investment, we have a legislative lever that is about flexibility and accountability. We've already announced legislative reforms to the mandates of ARENA and the CFC. These reforms will give their boards the flexibility to respond to our technology priorities. We don't currently have that. Our agencies are restricted by legislation and regulation to invest in the new technologies of 2010, not the emerging technologies of 2020. These reforms will enable them to support the technologies that reduce emissions across all sectors of our economy. On an annual basis, we'll review legislation that's a barrier to achieving our stretch goals. We'll table the low emissions technology statement in Parliament each year. Future statements will highlight the impact our investments are having, our progress against stretch goals, and offer a frank assessment of legislative and regulatory barriers. Now, third, we have a regulatory lever that's about enablement. We'll provide just over $40 million to the Clean Energy Regulator to take responsibility for developing and streamlining emissions reductions fund methods. The regulator already has a target of halving the time it takes to develop new methods and will work closely with industry in doing so. We won't mandate the deployment of technologies. We've seen the unintended consequences of mandated volume targets for specific technologies, and we won't repeat that. But our regulatory changes will be focused on removing barriers to deployment of these priority technologies. And the final lever is international engagement and collaboration. Now, Australia is a world leader in many emissions reduction technologies like household solar and soil carbon farming, more generally. We are also one of the great energy exporters of the world. Our ability to reduce global emissions through technology is clear. And that's why the Prime Minister will write to all of our key partner countries, Canada, Europe, New Zealand and our North Asian trading partners, to invite them to join our efforts. This will build on the work we're already doing in forums like the IEA's Clean Energy Ministerial. And we have strong bilateral collaboration in areas such as hydrogen with Germany, Japan and Korea. Australians should be proud of our achievements. We're reducing emissions through hard work and diligence. And that's why we want to work with key partners, the US, UK, China, Japan, Korea and India, among others. Australia has always been an outcomes-focused nation. We as a people don't always go onto the world stage and crow about our achievements, but we should be proud of them. Our track record is one of quiet achievement, and our plan is based on balance and outcomes, not ideology. We've always been clear on how we will achieve our international obligations. We told you how we would get to our 2020 target, and many didn't believe that we'd get there, but we did, and with strong jobs growth and a strong economy. We told you how we will get to our 2030 target, and we will do it with strong jobs growth and a strong economy. We know what we must do, and we know how to do it. This is a plan which is about outcomes, a plan that will bring the world with us, a plan that drives the good jobs and the strong economy Australians want and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'm not sure whether you're a monarchist or not, but Prince Charles has made some rather interesting comments overnight in regards to emissions reductions for the planet, and I'll quote him. He says, "We must now put ourselves on a warlike footing, approaching our action from the perspective of a military-style campaign." He says, in his words, climate change is becoming a comprehensive catastrophe. "I see no other way forward but to call for a Marshall-like plan for nature, people and the planet." Our Marshall Plan, for the younger ones in the audience, the US and 17 nations after World War II committed $15 billion, $115 billion in our terms today, to rebuild Europe after the war. What do you think of Prince's idea and his view that it's a comprehensive catastrophe?
Well, I think it is a serious challenge, and I think we have to deal with it, address it in the way that we do best, which is what we're outlining here. I mean, the whole point I'm making here is that humans have been extraordinarily effective at dealing with tough challenges throughout our history. We do that time and time again through progress on technology. That's how we feed the world. That's how we've delivered the prosperity that we enjoy and we've become accustomed to. And I think that's where the world needs to focus. I mean, you've got to remember here that this is a global outcome that we have to achieve. We've got to bring the developing world with us. The developing world wants prosperity. Australians want prosperity. Everyone wants prosperity, and they should. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a great thing. But the way to achieve emissions reduction alongside prosperity is to invest in those technologies that give us the real prospects of bringing down emissions.
First question, I remind everyone there's a long list of journos today. One question per person, please. David Crowe.
Thank you, Sabra. Thank you, Minister. David Crowe from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. You've outlined a plan that will basically guide $18 billion in taxpayer money pouring into energy. It's a huge amount of money, but it's not clear to me what the benchmark is for success. There's no net zero target by 2050, so taxpayers are being asked to accept $18 billion in outlay without a benchmark that they can use to tell whether you succeed at your job or not. Now, globally, well, you've got a 2030 target. You say you're reaching it in a canter, but globally, talks are already moving ahead of that. We're going to see at the United Nations summits in the future talk about 2035, talk about 2040. Now, if, as you say, you're getting to 2030 in a canter, and if, as you say, you've got this good plan to spend $18 billion, isn't it now time for you to say what your 2035 or 2040 target is, and to actually come clean with the Australian voters now about the fact that you'll have one and how ambitious you can be with it?
Well, we're very clean with the Australian voters, and you know, I'd highlight the fact that the opposition isn't. We have a very clear 2030 target, and if we look at the Paris Agreement, the nationally determined contributions are a 2030 target. In a few years' time, they will extend out to 2035. That's how the Paris Agreement works, and we're unambiguous in seeking to not just meet that target, but to beat it, just as we've met and beaten our 2020 target, despite much scepticism about whether we would. And to put this in perspective, in 2013, when Labor was still in government, they made a forecast for emissions in 2020 that was 100 million tonnes higher than what we'll achieve, almost 20% higher than what we'll achieve, and that was with a carbon tax. So what we've achieved in the last 10 years is extraordinary. We'll do it again in the next 10. We'll meet and beat those targets, and we are creating a platform here for emissions reduction well beyond 2030. The goals are clear. We have to bring those technologies that can really move the dial into parity where they're higher emitting alternatives. That way, it's just straight economics. We will ensure that we have a strong economy, strong jobs growth, strong investment alongside emissions reduction.
And when will you then have a 2035 target?
When, as it's required by the Paris Agreement. In a couple of years' time, we will have to extend.
The way the
Paris Agreement works, Crowe, is you just keep extending out every few years, and that's the way it will continue on. But the crucial point here is that you've got to focus on the stuff you can do today that works, that we can do now, to set yourself up for that emissions reduction trajectory, not just through to 2030, which we'll meet and beat, but beyond. And that's exactly what we're describing today.
And why not before the next election? Why won't you tell voters what that 2035 target is?
We'll keep telling voters about what we're doing and how well we're doing many times between now and the next election. As I say, I note that the opposition doesn't have a 2030 target. That is the primary target of the Paris Agreement. Let's be clear. That is what we have to focus on. We have to meet and beat that, and we have to set ourselves up, not just in Australia. The Paris Agreement is about global outcomes, and we have to set ourselves up to achieve those global outcomes, not just through to 2030, but beyond, and technology is the key.
Laura Tingle.
Minister, you talked about David was asking about telling voters, but I'm wondering about telling investors. Now, we've got both Germany and France investing huge amounts of money on hydrogen as part of their COVID recovery programs, 100 billion euros in France's case, and 9 billion euros in Germany. The problem for Australia, it strikes me, is that there's going to be, in a capital-constrained world, we're going to be competing for that private sector money with countries like Germany and France and others. And to do that, we're going to have to be really competitive, and people have to be very confident about the outlook.
Yes.
And investors say they need that emissions reduction target to know what the plan is. It's fine to have these priorities, but they need to know what the plan is. So how do you reassure investors and drag that capital in, particularly when they're investing so much more than Australia?
Well, let's be clear here. We have an emissions reduction target of 2030. It's a 26% reduction on the baseline 2005 levels, and we'll meet and beat that. And we've done it before. We have form, we have the track record, and we'll do it again. But what we've also done here is made very clear where our technology priorities are, and we're putting money where our mouth is. $18 billion of investment. You take hydrogen, which you mentioned, Laura. We've already committed over $500 million. We committed another $70 million last week for a new hydrogen export hub. I'm sure that won't be the end of the investments. And that is a very significant amount for Australia. But if you look at Australia as a smaller country than Germany or France, we have to focus on where we have an advantage. If I look at hydrogen, we are extraordinarily well positioned. Why? Because we're one of the biggest energy exporters in the world. We're the biggest LNG exporter in the world. We opened up those markets into Korea, Japan, China. It was Australia who did it. We led the way. And we're the biggest in the world as a result. We can do exactly the same with hydrogen. And we're saying to investors, we're putting our money where our mouth is, we're going hard. Now, we're already seeing the results. If you take the Latrobe supply chain project, where we're working through how best to transport hydrogen up into Asia, and North Asian countries want access to hydrogen. We've invested $50 million. The total investment in that is times 10. It's over $500 million. $500 million. Now, if we can get times 10, I can tell you $18 billion becomes a very, very big number. We're not planning on times 10 on every project, but we will see projects like that. And hydrogen is one of those areas where we're signalling very strongly to the private sector. Come with us, invest. We see the opportunity. I'm very confident others see the opportunity. We've had a phenomenal response to our hydrogen round, which Arena's running on R&D investment in hydrogen. And these other areas of technology that I've described, I am very confident the private sector will follow the very strong signals we're sending.
Is that, in short, trust us, we're the government?
No, trust us, we're doing it. That's far more. You know, the whole point about what I'm talking about here is we have a track record. We're doing it. This is building on our strengths, and it's building on our achievements. And if you look at hydrogen, we're already doing it. If you look at each of these technology areas, well, I can tell a story about Australia's achievements to date and why continuing to push down that path is a great prospect for this country, not just for domestic emissions reduction, but for jobs, for growth, for exports, and for developing world-leading technologies. We've picked those priority technologies on that basis.
Catherine Murphy.
Catherine Murphy from Guardian Australia. So, Minister, we get no clarity on the targets beyond 2030. Could we at least get clarity on definitions? I can't find in the roadmap any definition of low or green or clean technologies. So what is the definition? Is it determined by emissions intensity, or is it determined by the amount of abatement that those particular technologies drive? And leading from that question, how were these 5 priorities determined in your list of, in your down the list, in your enablers? You've got technologies, for example, like generation enablers that drive integration of renewables into the power grid. You've got energy efficiency, which is a proven cheap technology. You've got abatement of fugitive methane emissions, which, given the profile of Australia's emissions, would seem a pressing priority right now. So how did you determine your top 5?
Because they are the technologies that can move the dial in a significant way on reducing Australia's emissions, helping us to achieve our 2030 target and helping us to achieve reductions beyond 2030. Each one of them backs in technologies that will play a significant role in critical sectors in the economy, whether it's agriculture, whether it's electricity, whether it's manufacturing. If you look at aluminium, I don't need to tell many in this audience, aluminium is one of our highest emission industries. If we are to have an aluminium industry that succeeds into the future, we need to work out how to bring emissions down. So we've targeted those areas where we can really move the dial, but they're also those areas where Australia has natural advantage. Now, we'll deploy other technologies. I mean, EVs that are going to grow in Australia in the coming years, and we've announced last week investment in over $70 million in infrastructure support to enable that technology into Australia in a significant way, particularly for fleets where we see the first big opportunity. So there's many other technologies that will play a role in this, but what we've done is pick the ones that can move the dial, where we have advantage, where we can build industries, where we can create jobs, where we can drive investment, and we can, importantly, and this is a crucial point, where we can support a global outcome of emissions reduction while strengthening prosperity. And this is the great challenge the world has to overcome. It's not just an emissions reduction challenge, it's an emissions reduction challenge that's consistent with enabling countries, particularly in the developing world, to grow their prosperity and decarbonising, finding ways to reduce emissions in industries like agriculture, aluminium, steel is absolutely crucial to achieving that.
Well, that's the five, but what's the definition of green?
The definition, what will move the dial in bringing down our emissions.
So there isn't a specific definition in terms of emissions intensity?
That's pretty specific, Catherine. Bringing down emissions is the goal here. And this is the point. We are absolutely goal-oriented, outcome-oriented. I said this has been our approach all the way along. We don't want to get ideological about this. We want to be practical, do stuff that works, do stuff where we can make a difference and bring emissions down. That's the goal. That's how these technologies were chosen.
Phil Curry.
Hi, Minister. Phil Curry from the AFR. Energy policy has probably been the single greatest policy failure of federal politics over the last decade. And that's one of the reasons why no one's built anything, because they don't know what the rules are and they don't know if they're going to change if you get a change of government. You today are picking winners in the emerging technology space. You're going to, as you said, you're going to throw a ton of money behind your chosen technologies to encourage the private sector to do the same. Why would someone in the private sector, say, follow the lead if they're not guaranteed those priorities may not change with a change of government? And to mitigate against that, would you work constructively with the ALP in a proper bipartisan basis to ensure that at least some or all of these things will survive a change of government? Otherwise, we'll be back to where we are now.
Yeah. So there's a couple of parts to your question, Phil. The first is you made the statement that people haven't built. Well, they have. They spent $9 billion on energy generation in 2019, and we're on track to a similar $9 billion in energy generation this year. That's 6.3 gigawatts a year in a grid of about 50 gigawatts. That's not growing in demand. That's an extraordinary investment. It's completely unprecedented. Now, the challenge with it, and I've made this point in the speech, is it's got to be balanced. So the private sector is investing. We've got to make sure we've got the right balance and the right technologies coming through. And of course, I made the point about hydrogen investment, and there's other areas of very significant investment we've seen in those technologies. Carbon capture and storage. We've got the biggest carbon capture storage project in the world at Gorgon in Australia. So the investment's happening. We've got to make sure it's balanced. We've got to make sure the signals are strong about that balance, and we're sending very, very strong signals. As you said, with $18 billion, that's a pretty strong signal to the private sector. Now, your point about picking winners. The nature of R&D portfolios is that you have to place bets. We're placing a bet on a portfolio here. And that's what companies do, that's what nations do, that's what universities do. That is how R&D investment works. It has to evolve, but as I said, it should evolve in a gradual way, in a very well-informed and well-thought-through way, which is why we're locking in this advisory panel. And the private sector can have confidence. Whilst we're in government, we will always maintain that principle of continuing to focus on those priority technologies that are going to bring down emissions. In terms of bipartisanship, we've laid our plan out here very, very carefully. I don't know what Labor's plans are. I don't know what their target is for 2030. I don't know how they're going to achieve that target that they don't have. They're questions for them. Do we want to work with them to get this agenda implemented? Absolutely. And I think there's much in this for all of us to agree on. So we would very much like Labor to engage with us to deliver this agenda, and there'll be opportunities through legislative changes, some of which I've outlined here today, Labor to work with us to do exactly that.
You talked about $9 billion in energy investment there. What's that made up of?
It's nearly all solar and wind. Nearly all solar and wind. Yeah. And record levels, as I said. I mean, by global standards, we are absolutely shooting the lights out on that one.
Simon Gross.
Simon Gross, Canberra IQ. I've got a question about the soil carbon option.
Yeah.
It's the only, from my quick read of the book, it's the only option that where the potential reduction of carbon is actually stated. It says that improving agricultural practices in 25% of Australia's agricultural land could result in up to 90 million tonnes a year, and it says being drawn from the atmosphere. Now, 90 million tonnes, that's about almost 20% of our annual, so that's serious. What does it mean drawing CO2 from the atmosphere? Is this just about farmers managing their spent crops, or is it about actively processing fossil fuel emissions and taking it over in a truck to the farm?
No. So it's essentially photosynthesis. The photosynthesis does, of course, people understand this from high school science, takes CO2, puts it into the plant, and much of that organic carbon from the plant then remains in the soil afterwards, depending on your practices. Now, farmers know how to do that. That's what they do, particularly on pastures. The big job of a farmer is to grow more pasture, and some of that pasture stays in the ground, and some of it gets buried very deep, as much as a metre deep. And so the job is to get more of that to happen. Now, as I say, farmers already know a lot about how to do that. The great challenge is to measure it at low cost. Because if we can measure it at low cost, we can actually verify that it's happening. Farmers can be paid for the work that they do. And we can improve the techniques and reduce the costs of storing that soil carbon in the soil. And traditionally, the way we tested soil carbon was we still do. We put a probe a metre deep down into the ground. We have to do it in lots and lots of areas, parts of even an individual paddock, and that gets expensive. But we also know that satellite imagery offers us the opportunity to dramatically reduce that cost if we can actually see from satellite imagery that goes over on a regular basis how much soil carbon is being produced and how much is being stored in the soil. If we can get that technology really working, it already works, but really working as a way of measuring soil carbon, we can dramatically reduce the cost down to $3 per hectare per year, which is what we're targeting here. And then we see the opportunity as very big. They're big numbers. You're absolutely right. 90 million tonnes a year is about 20% of our emissions. Because we have so much agricultural land in Australia relative to our population, it is a big number and it's a big opportunity, and that's why we're pursuing it.
Tom Connell.
Tom Connell from Sky News. Minister, just on the highlights page, it talks about avoiding in the order of 250 million tonnes of emissions per year by 2040. Yeah. It does mention that it's both technology at home and also emissions export, so clarify that if you need to. But I don't have a department, I've got the back of an envelope. Does that mean if we've got 450 million tonnes by the end of 2030, take off 250, we're at 200, and on that back of an envelope, even if it's not a legislated or a set target, we're looking at about 66% reduction from 2005.
Tom, so you're missing that there's other technologies, some of which are mature, like solar and wind, that are already doing that work and will continue doing that work. So this is in addition. And the point about, you are dead right, this is a very big number. And the point about these priority technologies, and this goes to Catherine's question earlier, is we've chosen them because they can deliver big numbers. That's what it's about. We want to go after those biggest opportunities to reduce our emissions and emissions around the world. And just to put this into perspective, I'll repeat something I referred to in the speech. These 5 priority technologies reduce emissions in a very substantial way in sectors that cover 90% of the world's emissions. Because you've got agriculture, you've got manufacturing, you've obviously got sectors like steel and aluminium, which are a very, very significant part of global emissions, much as which is coming from places like China and the other countries in the developing world. These technologies are very, very big levers, and they can have a very big impact. They won't be the whole amount. There's other technologies which we refer to in the document where we won't necessarily have a competitive advantage, but they will play a role in Australia and around the world on top of that. But that's in addition to those other established technologies or technologies that won't be developed in Australia.
Greg Brown.
Greg Brown from The Australian. On the Collinsville project, the proponent of that has asked to be exempt from the Paris Agreement, and there are Liberal MPs who have said that it's just not going to go ahead. So can you be straight up with us? Is a brand new coal-fired power station, is that incompatible with Australia's commitments under Paris?
Look, all sorts of projects are compatible with the Paris Agreement. What matters is the balance, Greg. And the balance has to be one.
The proponent itself has said that it will need financial compensation under any changes in emissions targets. You've said today there will be a 2035 target. So does that mean, effectively, when it comes to new coal-fired power generation, a brand new one, it's not going to work with our commitments?
No, I'm not saying that at all, Greg. I'm saying that what matters is the balance of projects, assets, operations you have in the country. It's the balance that delivers the aggregate outcome. You don't measure the outcome on an individual project. Now, with reference to that particular project, it's a feasibility study. The whole purpose of a feasibility study is to see if it's feasible and on what basis is it feasible. We'll await the outcomes of that feasibility study. I'm not going to preempt those outcomes now.
Michelle Grattan.
Michelle Grattan from Conversation. Mr Taylor, the government's been very prescriptive with private enterprise about building a new power station in the Hunter region. So the Prime Minister has also indicated that you're ready to go if private enterprise doesn't step up. So therefore, could I ask you, if you have to carry through that threat, how big would the power station, the gas power station you're talking about, be? How much would it cost? How would it be financed? And when would construction start and it be ready to produce?
Okay, so there's a bunch of questions there.
All related.
Yeah, all related, I understand. So the situation is this. When Liddell closes, we lose an effective 1,000 megawatts of capacity from the market. Economics says you lose a big chunk of supply. Without replacing it, the price goes up. So we've given the private sector until April next year to get to financial close with capacity that can replace that 1,000 megawatts that's leaving the market. We will fill whatever gap is left. Now, we have some projects that are on the books, but none have reached financial close. We have Kalawara, Energy Australia, potentially a great project, but it's got to get to financial close. We've got AGL working on a gas peaker in Newcastle, but it's got to get to financial close. We've got others in recent days who have said that they can invest. Yes, great, but it's got to get to financial close. It's got to deliver power 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and we'll step in and fill the gap. Now, the cost of it, the size of it, will depend on that remaining gap. We'll do it, as we've said, through Snowy Hydro. We'll finance it. And Snowy already has a gas generator in the Hunter Valley, so there's no. This is not new for them. We'll finance it. We'll fill that gap. We would prefer the private sector get to financial close, but if they don't, we'll step up and we'll make sure it happens.
And what's the timeline?
The timeline's April.
No. The timeline, if you have to step in, when would construction start? When would it be producing
Liddell
power?
leaves in early 2023, so that's where it's got to be completed by. That's why April next year is such a critical date, because that's about as short a time as we can contemplate would be needed in order to get that replacement capacity in place. And let's be very clear about this. This is partly about reliability, but it's primarily about affordability. If you take that much capacity out of the market, it's a huge amount in a short period of time. We saw what happened with Hazelwood. We saw very, very sharp increases in prices, and we're not prepared to accept that. But we are asking the private sector to step up. The rules are very clear, and we want them to get to financial close by April next year.
Thank you.
Andrew Probyn.
G'day, Minister. Andrew Probyn from the ABC. You said earlier that we are placing a bet on the portfolio here when it comes to your picking winners approach. But in practice, how will it work? Say, take, for example, low-carbon steel. If you won't have a carbon price, would you simply have to mandate a proportion of steel being produced through green steel, which is like hydrogen, and wouldn't that just simply put the price of steel up?
We already have the price that matters, and that's the price of steel. And that's why we've set our target as the price of steel. We want green steel, low-emission steel, to be produced at the same cost as the current cost of producing steel, the price of steel. So that's already there. That's the goal. And the whole point about this is we don't want to raise the costs of existing higher-emitting technologies and fuel sources. We want to reduce the cost of low-emission alternatives. And the only way you can do that is for the technologies to get to the point where their cost of production for steel or aluminium or electricity, whatever it might be, is lower than the current higher-emitting alternatives. That way we deliver prosperity, that way we deliver jobs, investment, all of those things that we want.
Just to repeat the question, without a carbon price, how do you get low-carbon steel? You would have to mandate steel being made in a green way?
No. People adopt new technologies because the economics of those new technologies...
Or they're being told to?
No. Well, you know what? I know on the other side of politics there's always been an instinct to tell consumers what to buy. Always been an instinct to tax them in order to make them to buy what they want. We're not going to do that. We've been so clear about this at all times. We were clear about it before the last election. We're clear about it now. So the way through, and this is not true just for Australia. This is true for developing countries, for New Zealand, for Canada. If you want to get emissions down, you've got to make sure those low emissions technologies come in and can produce whatever good it is they're producing, whether it's aluminium or steel or electricity, at a lower cost than, or at least equal, to their higher emitting alternatives. And that way you don't have to impose a tax. That way you don't have to make things more expensive for people. That's what we're seeking to do. We've seen that now. We're seeing that solar is producing energy. It's not dispatchable, but energy at a low cost. That's a great thing. And that's resulting in very significant investment of household solar on people's roofs and large-scale solar as well. So we know this works. We know it works because this has been the history of technology through the world, that new, lower-cost technologies emerge that offer consumers great advantage over the existing alternatives. We want to see that with the lower-emitting alternatives, whether it's aluminium, steel, or transport, you name it.
Rebecca Gredley.
Hi Minister, Rebecca Gredley from AAP. Thank you for your speech. Nev Power couldn't guarantee to the Senate's COVID-19 inquiry that no one on his commission stood to personally gain from the gas-fired recovery plan. Given Mr Power's role with Strike Energy and Andrew Labiris's role on the board of a Saudi oil and gas company, can you tell Australians that no one on that commission stands to personally gain from the plan that they recommended to you?
Well, I can tell you that the plan that we've announced today is our plan. It's our plan. The government makes the decision. Yes, we get advice from the Technology Investment Advisory Committee. Yes, we get advice from the NCCC. Yes, we get advice from departments and agencies. We've gone to ARENA, we've gone to CFC, we've gone to many people. We had hundreds of people come along to our technology investment roadmap process. We've had hundreds of people engaged at every stage of the way. But ultimately, the decisions that we've announced last week and this week are our decisions, the decisions of the government based on what we believe is right for this country, is right for job creation, is right in a coronavirus environment where we want a strong economy more than ever. and they're decisions that we stand by, and we are confident will deliver the outcomes that Australians want and deserve.
But will they personally benefit from it?
Well, the decisions are ours, not theirs. That's the point I'm making. It's our decision. We're the government. We've made these decisions. We've made these announcements. They're our decisions, and that's our job, and that's what we're doing. And we'll take advice from many people. We take advice from people in business all the time. We take input. We talk to them. We talk to people outside of business, NGOs, all the time. They all have various interests, but we make the decisions, and that's what we've done here. And they have to be the right decisions for Australia, and we're very confident they are.
Sure, sorry. And it's a simple yes or no. Do you know that or not?
Well, it's not something that I'm even focused on, Sabra. I'm focused on delivering a plan that is right for the country, and we make the decision. We made the decisions here that I've announced today. We've made the decisions that we announced last week. That's the role of government. We take input from lots of people along the way.
Katie Burgess.
Katie Burgess from the Canberra Times. There are concerns that carbon capture is an unproven technology. Even the Gorgon facility you mentioned earlier, when it's in full swing, will still leave around 5 million tonnes of CO2 going into the atmosphere annually. Why are you gambling taxpayer money on an unproven technology?
Because it's not. So let's go to the facts. There's 58 carbon capture and storage projects in the world, either in development or in operation. 19 of those are in operation right now. The biggest one is Gorgon, which is taking 4 million tonnes annualised of sequestration a year. It's based on a technology that has been used for decades in the oil and gas industry and is being used now to store that carbon under the ground. Now, this is a technology that is recommended by the IPCC, by the International Energy Agency. It is part of the plans for the UK, for Europe, for both sides of politics in the United States. Both sides. Biden has said in recent weeks he will double down on carbon capture and storage and invest in R&D in carbon capture and storage. So, you know, it is somewhat odd that in this country, it seems where we are a leader in this technology, we're certainly playing a leadership role. It appears to me that in some quarters at least it's more controversial than it is almost anywhere in the world. But it is an accepted technology across large swathes of the world. It's part of the answer. It's not the whole answer. The answer requires balance, but it's a critical part of it.
Still a lot of CO2 going into the atmosphere though.
Well, no, it goes into the ground. That's the point. I mean, whether it's biological sequestration or geological sequestration, biological where we talked about that earlier with soil carbon, we're taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through pasture growth, for instance, and that's becoming soil carbon. And in the case of geological sequestration, we're putting it in caverns under the ground. They are taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That's the objective here. That's what the goal is. And this is what I say. We are relentlessly outcome focused. Let's not get ideological about the technologies. Technologies just deliver outcomes. They're only interesting because they can deliver outcomes, and that's what we're focused on.
We're almost at time. Are you happy to take some more questions? We're nearly at the end.
Yes, sure.
Lani Scar.
Hello, Lani Scar from the West Australian. Thanks so much for your speech. You said during your speech we should pursue opportunities that play to Australia's strengths. Australia has almost a third of the world's uranium deposits. Why are small modular reactors only on the watching technologies list or watching brief list? Is it because you accept that it's too politically hard to get Australians to accept nuclear technology, and can it actually ever be really safe?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Lani. A couple of points I'd make. I mean, we do export, one of the biggest exporters of uranium in the world, of course, and that's an important industry to us and will remain so. But if you look at nuclear generators, which is what you're talking about here, traditional nuclear generators, the costs are high. We've seen that with the UK. That's one of the few countries in the world, developed world, that's building a new nuclear generator, and it's proved to be very, very expensive. The hope of the nuclear industry is small modular reactors, that they can bring that cost down and in the process achieve outstanding safety outcomes. It's early days. with small modular reactors. Only 3 have been built, all in the developing world, none in the developed world yet. We're going to watch very closely. We haven't got experience or history in large-scale nuclear power generation for consumers. So the critical thing for us in this case is to watch and see if those technologies are proven up in the coming years, and we'll certainly be doing that very closely.
So it's not that you're afraid for the political fight to sell that to Australians?
We are absolutely relentlessly focused here on outcomes. Now, our judgment at this point is that's not going to deliver us the outcomes we need. That may change, and this is the whole point. This priority list and the roadmap will evolve. It needs to evolve sensibly and carefully, but it will evolve. But at this point, that's a watching brief technology, and it's not the only one. There are others as well where we think there may be potential, but we'll be watching very closely.
Jonathan Kersley.
Minister, thanks very much. Jonathan Kersley from 9 News. 2 years ago, your predecessor, now Treasurer, stood here giving the guarantee to the National Energy Guarantee, saying, "We must not miss this opportunity to deliver a more affordable, more reliable and lower emission energy system for Australia." This is a very glossy 46-page document. You've spoken about more affordability, more reliability and outcomes. How can you convince the Australian public, though, that this is now the way forward, given the National Energy Guarantee couldn't get past your own party group?
Well, let's be clear about the National Energy Guarantee. There are 2 parts to it. Retailer reliability obligation, it's in place. I mentioned that in my speech. We've already done it. It's important because that will drive the incentive for dispatchability to balance up the intermittency we're seeing in our grid. And the target, 26% reduction target in the national electricity market, will achieve that probably in the next 12 months, if not sooner. So we've achieved the outcomes.
Policy, this is another policy from the coalition government.
So let me finish. We've achieved the outcomes. And again, we're focused on outcomes. The relentless focus in this area of the government is outcomes. We've achieved those outcomes. Now, in terms of achieving outcomes with this, we've put in $18 billion behind it. We're serious about it. We're already seeing the private sector and state governments matching significant funding in critical areas. We've seen the New South Wales Government state deal where the New South Wales Government is matching our funding in many areas. And we're seeing the private sector doing that. And I gave that example of the hydrogen supply chain project, for instance, earlier, but there's many others like it. The CFC's getting a leverage ratio of about 3 to 1. Every dollar they put in, we get $3. And so we have a track record on this. We've got the delivery and achievements. There's much more work to do in the coming years. And this document lays out how we're going to achieve that. And coming back to your original question, we've already achieved those outcomes that the Treasurer described back 2 years ago.
Stella Todorovic.
Stella Todorovic, Network 10, thank you for your address today, Minister. Your Senator colleague and former Resources Minister Matt Canavan has written today that gas-fired power is unlikely to do many of the things you claim it will do. Is he wrong or are you wrong, Minister?
Gas-fired power has the potential to do an enormous amount for us and is doing it now. So let me put this into perspective. We've got gas prices, spot gas prices now, down around just above $4 a gigajoule. Right? That was unimaginable a few years ago. That's in line with the price in the United States. It's internationally competitive, and that means if you're a fertiliser manufacturer, you can now buy spot gas in Australia at a price which is comparable with the lowest price market, or certainly one of them in the world, which is the United States, where many fertiliser manufacturers have been moving to. That low gas price is also supporting low wholesale electricity prices. We saw a reduction in the wholesale electricity price every month of the last 12 months. They were 40% down before COVID, and they're now significantly more than that down. So we're seeing lower gas prices, creating opportunities for manufacturing, creating opportunities in the electricity market. We do have to make sure we lock that in longer term contracts, and we've laid out last week a whole series of reforms, a package of reforms that are focused on making sure we have long-term gas pricing which is internationally competitive, which can support manufacturing, which can support gas for electricity production. The other point I'd really emphasise in the gas debate is this. Gas is important for electricity production, and increasingly it's setting the price of electricity. So the price of gas leads to the price of electricity. So lower gas prices we're seeing is leading to lower electricity prices. But gas is a critical feedstock for manufacturing, absolutely critical. And as I said, I talked about the Haber-Bosch process for producing nitrogen fertiliser. That has traditionally relied on gas.
And
traditionally relied on gas. We have been able to multiply the crop yields of our farmers by 4 times by being able to convert gas to nitrogen fertiliser. It's been a phenomenal success. Now, we can do more of that here in Australia. We want to build an agriculture sector of $100 billion and access to fertiliser will be a critical part of that. And over time, we can reduce the carbon emissions involved with producing that fertiliser through hydrogen. But gas as an industrial feedstock, extremely well suited to Australia. We do lots of it in Western Australia. We do lots of it on the East Coast as well now. We want to see more of it. And the increasingly competitive gas prices we're seeing in Australia, we're the biggest exporter in the world. This is a great success story and we need to build on it.
And how long can the supply last? The gas supply?
Well, you know, I mean, I'm not going to predict 50, 60, 70 years out for the gas industry today. I don't know the answer to that question. But I tell you what, gas can play an enormously important role in manufacturing, in agriculture, in electricity in the coming years. And we have a pathway for lower emissions reductions through the hydrogen sector, which we're investing an enormous amount in, as I described earlier.
Shubha Krishnan.
Shubha Krishnan, SBS World News. The PM has said that net zero emissions target by 2050 is achievable. So why is there so much resistance by the government to commit to it? Is it more about appeasing the right wing of the coalition rather than the target itself? And will you rule it out after the election?
Well, as I said earlier, our focus is on our 2030 target in the Paris Agreement. That's the nationally determined contribution. And in a few years' time, we'll have to extend that out to 2035. That's how the Paris Agreement works, and we'll continue on from there. That's the goal. What we're not going to do is impose a target that's going to impose costs on the economy, destroy jobs, and stop investment. Now, the Paris commitment globally is to net zero in the second half of the century, and we'd like that to happen as soon as possible. But the key to achieving that is to having technologies in those critical emitting sectors where the economics are coming into line, coming into parity with their higher emitting alternatives, so businesses, households choose those technologies because they're good for their economics. That's how emissions will come down across the world. That's how we will contribute not just to Australia's emission reductions beyond 2030, but the world's. And that's what we've laid out here today.
Last question, Claudia Long.
Hi, thank you. Claudia Long from Triple J. You mentioned in your speech that this plan is going to help create around 130,000 jobs by 2030, but given that state governments and the private sector and others are going to have to provide some of the funding to get there, can you actually guarantee that many jobs are going to be created, and when will you release the modelling showing how that figure is reached?
So, to your question about the jobs creation, we're talking about $18 billion of investment from government, and based on our historical track record, we're very confident we can achieve upwards of $50 billion of total investment. Now, we know that has the potential to deliver 130,000 jobs. It's a phenomenal investment in our economy. And, you know, this is not, we're not working here on guesses, we're working here on experience. I talked about the CFC, they're getting very high leverage with their investments. We're seeing very high leverage with investments from ARENA, from the Emissions Reduction Fund, from the CSIRO's investments in this area. We get many multiples of our expenditure. We want that multiple to be as high as possible. And capital investment like that, R&D investment, generates jobs, has done for a long while, will continue to, and we think that's an achievable ratio, and it's certainly one we'll be pursuing.
Can I just ask, you're very confident, but is that a yes or a no that those jobs can be? Is that a yes or a no that they can be guaranteed by 2030?
Well, we know if we deliver $18 billion of investment that we're doing, and we get $50 billion, upwards of $50 billion of total investment, then we can generate 130,000 jobs. So that's the commitment, that's the plan.
Everybody, please join me in thanking Angus Taylor.